Sean here with Vulcan Performance. Today we're talking about 5 essential insights you need to know as a health and fitness practitioner. We did the deadlift one a couple weeks ago. We're going to do the squatting one today. They're the top 2 movements in functional movement, so let's do it. And again, in this video, we're talking about things that people commonly think of as being bad. These are just misconceptions in the strength and conditioning world, and we want to try to correct those if we can. Number one, a lot of people think that full depth squatting is bad when actually full depth squatting is really good, and we want to do as much as possible. When you do a full depth squat, you're using the entirety of the range of motion in not only your hips and your knees and your ankles, but also your low back, your T-spine. The body's being fully worked throughout that range. If you don't use the range, it literally is the phrase, if you don't use it, you lose it. If you don't use it, that range never gets lubricated, it never gets strengthened, it never gets addressed. So therefore the area can become a little stagnant. So if you ever do move into that full range of motion, your body's not ready for it, it's not prepared, and your injury rates skyrocket. So full range of motion is what you need to be training at least somewhat of the time. Knee position can be huge for a deadlift, but maybe not for the reasons you think. So oftentimes we'll see people deadlift when we see the knees collapsing, we see them coming in. That's not a good thing. We don't exactly like that, but is it a bad thing? We don't really have much research indicating that injury rate's gonna go up with that. We tend to think that when we're doing PT with someone, if we have them get their knees out, work their knees out, they tend to feel better. So that's more anecdotally. But I will say this, we want to keep the knees out. We want to drive the knees out simply from a functional perspective and from a physiological perspective, because all we're trying to do when we drive our knees out, that cue, drive your knees out, you hear it screamed across the gym, is that we're trying to build a solid wall of external rotation so that our internal rotators, our adductor magnus, which is the strongest squatting muscle you have, can pull against that wall adequately and get you out of the hole. If you miss working on external rotation, if you're not worried about your knees collapsing, then really what you're missing is power and strength from producing stability in the hips to allow your prime movers to drive against that stability. Number 3, toe positioning. It can be huge. A lot of us try to let our toes go way out. We try to flare our feet out because we're running into mobility issues at the hip. We need to try to avoid that. We need to try to have the toes forward as much as we can, because at that point, when the toes are forward, we're able to access all of the torque in our hips. If they're already flared out, we've shortened those external rotators to a point to where they can't really help us with the movement. We've crushed our stability and we've crushed our power. We need to have a toe forward position. We like to say within 0 to 12 degrees. Ankle mobility is number 4, and if you've squatted before, then you know your ankles can get tight and it hurts your squat. We want to try to have the ankles opened up as much as we can before we squat. There's a lot of cool things that we can do from a mobility perspective with this, but if you're squatting and you feel like, man, my hips are tight, I feel super restricted, it may be the ankles. So you can take a look at yourself and see if you can. A good test is basically to try to, can you put your foot against the wall and put your knee to the wall? There's a couple different things we can do to get into this, but you need to be looking at your ankles when you're squatting. It can come into play. 5, squatting is not bad for your knees. It's actually really helpful. Again, if you're not using that range of motion, load and volume tend to be really good for building resilience in our body. You don't want to go too much. I want to stay in the sweet spot, but they tend to be great for building resilience, especially for the knees when there's a few different moving parts there. We want to try to use the full range of motion and strengthen through that so we can be as functional as we can. When life throws hard things at us, what can we do? We can knock them out, we can keep moving forward. Okay guys, so those are 5 insights that you need to know about the deadlift as a healthcare practitioner, whether you're programming for your clients, whether you're working out yourself. You need to know these things about squatting, and if you can implement these, you'll have a more successful squat program. All right guys, see ya.